First announcement. You remember that tomorrow that there is a big public services strike. This evening, straight after we finish at 5:30, before we go to dinner, we're just going to have a little, we've invited people from both the Teachers Union and PCS, that's the Public Services Union, to come and just say a few words about the strike, right? And those of you who are going to it first thing in the morning need to know that, so you know what you're doing and so on. So that's at 5:30. The Commission will be meeting directly after dinner at and sign up for what time you would like to leave. Is that clear? So you've got up to registration, sign, you'll see the sheets, to sign up when you would like to leave or which shuttle. How many shuttles are there?
It's going to be three.
Three.
The afternoon on Friday. So you come to the GLI desk, you've got 3 different times, and if you put your name on it, make sure it's going to be enough space.
Okay.
To Sheffield train station, yeah. I mean, if people do are going to the airport or anything like that, there's options of getting taxis, and the cheapest thing is to band together. So if anyone's leaving on Saturday, Peter is going to lead a taxi crew, trying to find people who are leaving around the same time on Saturday and get taxis together. Again, there's a bit of paper that you can put your name down on the GLI desk. So do that as soon as possible. Definitely start finalising times and let you know what's happening.
What did you say there? One step.
Or you just want to say, right, let's keep paying those who will not leave.
Okay.
Have they got everyone from outside? Dave,
Sorry?
have we got everyone from outside?
Next thing is, I know that a lot of you have been discussing in and around the summer school the issues around trade deals, TTIP and all those, all these big transatlantic and trans-Pacific and God knows what trade deals going on. Peter Rossman, you wrote this, didn't you, Peter? Yeah, Peter Rossman from the IUF has produced a pamphlet called Trade Deals. Okay, so there are a number of copies at the front here on the desk. So if you are interested, please do take at least a copy. And if you need lots of copies, I suggest you talk to Peter. Yeah, is that right? Good. Okay, next is that also the University College Union, directly related to what we're going to be talking about, has produced an annual environment report, which you may wish to see. I've got some copies here. Graham, do you want to say a word, a sentence?
Yeah, just that it covers our work last year. We won't be producing the current one for another couple of months. So I've got spare copies, and if you want to take them home, so you're more than welcome to grab them.
Very good. Okay, thank you. And then final announcement, as it were, is that we've been talking about the campaign around Qatar and migrant workers and so on and so forth. And I think we've got a very, very short video to show you, which is going to come on the screen now, is it?
Video?
The video.
Yeah.
They want to watch it now.
Can you see it now?
Can we just put it on now?
Okay.
It's very brief.
It's like 2 minutes.
And yeah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, it's actually not, sorry. We have a global sports campaign for decent work, which is part of our initiative to organize construction workers. I know you guys were happy that Germany won, but I was very sad because we organized over 100,000 construction workers who built the stadiums in Brazil. So they're very sad today. But this, yes, they are very sad. So this video will show our campaign, and maybe actually we might not have time. I think we have short. What I want to say is, since all of you are going to watch the World Cup today, as part of our campaign strategies, we looked at Brazil, South Africa, Brazil, and Russia, and now in Qatar. Is the strategy for Qatar. We have 11 demands in terms of the Qatar government that there's no kafala, there's no yes trading. It was we produced our own football jerseys. Which country? So we produced these things. We have 11 demands, which is one football team. And so each of the shirts has a number at the back and has like a demand, social protection. Brazil, which has that they were number one, but they're not going to be number one this year. But you know, it's like no kafala. So we have these 11 jerseys. And for those of you who can like watch football, you don't understand football, you don't understand anything. Oh, kafala! Ah, sorry.
It's like the offside rule.
It's a sponsorship system where someone to work in Qatar, he has to sign with the employer, and he. So there are many thousands of migrant workers who are stuck there. So the reason I'm showing you these shirts is that we want 11 volunteers to wear these shirts before the game. Yes, your eyes light up because you want to take of these shirts. So that we can do a photo before the game saying basically no to FIFA and also the back of the shirt. So there'll be a sign, so 11 people sign up, and you can pick whatever country you like. There's England is even here.
Yes, they are.
So, anyways, we want 11 volunteers, and then front at 8:30, right?
So, no, game starts at 9, right? So I suggest we meet 8:45 in the bar.
In the bar.
Yes. And in front of the screen, we are going to see how we're going to make the picture, and we have a banner as well. So, yes, 11 volunteers, please. Come here and pick up your shirts and show us in the bar 1 to 9.
The first 11.
Yeah.
Our message for the World Cup: fair play, fair games. World Cup and decent work. This campaign has changed the situation of the construction workers in Brazil.
E a luta continua. A luta não para. Viva os trabalhadores brasileiros! Viva os trabalhadores brasileiros! Viva os trabalhadores brasileiros!
FIFA is also part of the market.
What is the problem? Not allowed to film here in FIFA.
We will never stop until FIFA tries to reform itself and make sure that in their policy that labor rights must be implemented by any host country. So this will be a top fight for BWI to pressure on Qatar. No World Cup in Qatar if there's no labor rights or migrant rights. And the World Cup is only the beginning, because many construction workers now are organizing the hotels, the roads, the power plants, the factories that are being built. Because with this campaign, we tell them respect the rights of the construction workers.
Great, thank you so much. All right, and with that, I'd like to hand over to Brian, who's chairing this session.
Thanks, Dave. First of all, my name's Brian Simpson. I am a call centre worker from Glasgow in Scotland, and I represent young members on the Executive Council of Unite in the UK. We've got quite a, what I know is going to be quite a feisty debate coming up. We've got a debate on unions, climate change, and the inaction, really, that a lot of our comrades within the trade union movement feel that there is towards environmental protection. We've got a host of very good speakers. We've got Lara Skinner and Sean Sweeney, who are co-directors of the Global Labour Institute in New York at Cornell University. We've got Gary White, who is the Gary Smith, who is the GMB National Officer for Energy and Utilities, and he is from Edinburgh in Scotland, so he's going to think that I deliberately got his second name wrong, but it's absolutely not the case. If I could, if there is a chair apart from myself, I just want to give a kind of brief overview from my own perspective in Unite. I think this is really the most important debate that we will have this week, because it's not only about securing the future of a planet, but it's also about securing or stopping the environmental impact. It's also
we could build on that.
It's also about you know, stopping the deaths and the destruction of habitats, mostly in the global south, from environmental impacts. You know, forced migration of people from their destroyed habitats, deforestation and flooding and so on, that is causing many of our members to have to flee their countries and their livelihoods. I personally think that as the greatest force for change in the labour movement, that we have the greatest responsibility to ensure, not only for the future generations, but for current members, for workers today, that we look to invest in green energies, that we look to move away from the current obsession, really, in the extraction industries. And I think we need to make clear a false dichotomy to start with, because for too long in the trade union movement, certainly our leadership has tried to make mutually exclusive the concept of environmental rights and workers' rights. From my perspective, they are exactly the same, and we can be fighting for both simultaneously. So that's just, you know, I wanted to bring that in. I'm very proud to be from a union which just last week, in the face of a leadership, you know, who wanted to have a more cautious approach, we have been quite clear against fracking in the UK, which I think is a huge step forward for the trade union movement, that we are being quite clear against such environmental destruction, and making clear that we support workers, but we also support the environment as well. So that brings me on quite comfortably to our next speakers, who are doing a lot of work based in New York, but all over the world. They've set up the trade unions for energy democracy, Lara Skinner and Sean Sweeney. I'm going to let them do a kind of joint presentation, and then we'll bring Gary in after that, and then we open up to what will be quite an important debate. So I'll just let these guys carry on.
Thanks, comrade. I'm just going to speak for 1 minute and then hand it over to Lara. This is going to be in two parts. We're going to talk about trade unions for energy democracy, why we've launched the project, and the sort of the scientific case, really. And you can see from this quote, science telling us all to revolt. Anybody who's taken even the most cursory glance of what is happening in the world's climate and ecosystems in general will understand the urgency of this conversation and the role of trade unions, the potential role to address it. And the second part is to contextualize the project a little bit in what's been happening with the global trade union movement around climate change, hopefully, and with some view of where things can go and perhaps should go in the period ahead. And this is a particularly important year, and we'll come back to that later. So I want to introduce my colleague Lara Skinner, who's going to sort of lay out the main case for TUED, as we call it, Unions for Energy Democracy, and I'll pick it up from there in about 15 minutes from now.
I'm going to stand over here.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna put that there so I can move the.
Should have got it wrong.
All right, thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody, for being here with us to have this discussion. As Sean said, there's sort of two main reasons why we launched this initiative that I'm going to focus most of my comments on. The first one is that we have an energy and climate emergency that amounts to a planetary crisis. That's the first part of it. We'll sort of walk through the climate and the climate science and the empirical evidence behind that. And then the second part, really important part, is that the energy transition to a sustainable, low-carbon, union-friendly energy system that we all thought was going to happen and that we know that we need to happen is not happening. So that energy transition is not happening. And I'll say a little bit more about both of those points. Before I move into the sort of climate science, though, I wanted to pick up on something that Rosa Pavanelli said yesterday. And that is that the climate crisis is one of, if not the most important social issues of our time. And trade unions leading and taking action on the climate crisis is a way for us to build a broad-based, powerful movement with young people, with students, with indigenous people, with the environmental and climate justice movements, and advance a vision for an alternative society that's based on economic democracy, international solidarity, and ecological sustainability. And I think, all of us in this room are pretty, familiar with the concept of the capitalist system abusing workers and the environment in equal measure. And we feel really strongly that this project, Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, is a key building block of a new political framework, ideology, and program for the labor movement that will help us build and achieve a radical democracy and a socialist society. So that's sort of, and Sean will talk more about the political approach of the project. So in terms of the climate and energy emergency that we're facing, I'll start with emissions. And basically the idea here is, and you can see the sort of projections through 2100, or this black line on the top, greenhouse gas emissions and pollution are rapidly increasing when they should be leveling off and decreasing. The latest scientific reports show that emissions have increased faster than any time in history from 2000 to 2014. So they're absolutely not leveling off and decreasing. We've already raised the Earth's temperature by 0.85 degrees Celsius, and the impacts of that are far worse than climate scientists predicted. In the last Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the sort of leading scientific body on climate change, 1,200 scientists from all over the world put this together. They said no one on the planet will be untouched by the impacts of climate change. And all of us in this room have probably experienced some of those impacts already. Floods, storm surges, droughts, heat waves. And I think the important thing for us to keep in mind is that it's the working class, it's women, it's people of color, it's immigrants that are disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change. And so then if we look at what happens if we continue business as usual, we just keep doing what we're doing, we're looking at a 4 to 6 degrees Celsius average increase in the Earth's temperature by 2100. That's planetary disaster. So that's just a bit on the emission situation. Another thing is that, many people thought, even up to a few years ago, that fossil fuels were running out and the transition to a more sustainable, low-carbon energy system was sort of inevitable, that it would, would just naturally happen. And that's simply not true. The maximum amount of CO2 that we can burn to stay below the 2-degree limit that many scientists have said we need to stay below is 565 gigatons. But the fossil fuel industry has 2,795 gigatons in reserves. That's 5 times the amount that we can burn, and it's worth $27 trillion. And this 2,795 gigatons that's in reserve, it's above ground economically. It's already counted in the stock value of these companies. So fossil fuels are not running out. In addition to that, what we're seeing is the fossil fuel industry really using their political power, the massive profits that they've accumulated to pursue what we're calling an extreme energy agenda. And this means basically using extreme extraction methods to get to hard-to-reach unconventional fossil fuels And these are typically processes that are extremely risky to workers, to communities, to the environment. And we're talking about tar sands oil and the proposed Keystone XL pipeline in the US that you've probably heard about. It would carry tar sands oil from Alberta, Canada, to the Gulf Coast of the United States. We're talking about mountaintop removal and surface coal mining. We're talking about deep sea and Arctic sea drilling, and then hydraulic fracturing for shale gas, also known as fracking. And just on fracking, I think it's really important to point out that the latest research on fracking shows that the methane leakage from fracking is much higher than we originally estimated. And so basically this idea that shale gas or natural gas was going to be this low carbon bridge fuel to renewables has been, proven untrue. And if you look at the full life cycle of emissions from fracking, from extracting it all the way to combusting, the emissions impact of it is actually greater than coal. So, and then I think another part of the extreme energy agenda that we should point out is that the fossil fuel industry is really pushing hard to recruit more unions to this agenda of fossil fuel expansion, and pushing to forge formal alliances with the labor movement around fossil fuel expansion and jobs. And this is something that we're seeing in the US a lot. So in this chart, the brown line represents investment in fossil fuels, and the kind of whitish line at the bottom represents investment in renewable energy. And basically what you see here is that massive new amounts of fossil fuels are coming into the global energy system, and it's making our efforts to control global warming practically impossible. So fossil fuels meet 80% of the world's energy demand now, and they're projected to meet about that amount through 2040. So they're projected to meet the majority of our energy demand through 2040. So what you have is energy demand keeps going up, the bulk of investment is in fossil fuels, and so the result is emissions continue to go ever upward. So what we see is energy expansion, not the energy transition that we need. So this chart here, the red is showing you all of the places where renewable energy production is below 5%. And you can see that's nearly everywhere in the world. There's just a few countries where it's actually above 5%. And currently, wind and solar only makes up 0.3% of global energy supply. 0.3%.
Can you just hold the picture up? Yeah, we're losing the top.
Oh. Can it move down?
I can't control that screen, no.
You see it? It's renewable energy below 5% of electricity production nearly everywhere.
So we can't move it?
I can't control that screen, no.
I can still use it.
The actual screen.
Right here?
She thinks
Oh, anywhere or?
Yeah, it should be anywhere.
This was working.
It was working. Yeah.
You do need it. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, okay. So another part of the energy emergency that we're talking about in this lack of transition to an equitable, sustainable, low-carbon energy system is energy poverty, right? So we're bringing more and more energy into the global energy system, but it doesn't mean that more people have access to energy or that electricity has become more affordable. So we still have 1.6 billion people in the world who don't have access to electricity. So energy poverty is a big part of this issue as well. And then the last part I'll mention on this energy emergency is that, fossil fuel corporations are really more powerful now than they've ever been. They're making record profits, and they're estimated to produce 80% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And they exert tremendous influence over the political economic system, and it's making it practically impossible for us to protect workers, communities, and the environment. And we see all too often that the profit motive is more important than protecting workers' health and safety. The latest example of that being the mining disaster in Turkey. And so, we're also seeing companies producing more and more fossil fuels, but doing it with less workers. In the US, coal production is up by 1/3 from the 1980s, but we're using half the number of workers. So, and this is a product of automation, but also deregulation of the industry. The fastest and largest producing coal region in the United States, the Powder River Basin, is 90% non-union. So, and then, we also see that shutting down union operations and reopening non-union operations is commonplace. So that gives you a sense of sort of the empirical and scientific evidence behind this energy and climate emergency that amounts to a planetary crisis, and evidence that the energy transition we really need is not happening. And I'll turn it over to Sean to talk about the political approach of this project we've developed.
Thanks, Lara. The title of this session is called, it's got the Great Inaction in it. What is meant by that is based on a paper I've drafted up, and I'd like some comments on it for the Unions for Energy Democracy, that talks about this period of history of the last 20 years when it's been absolutely clear with every passing year that we face a civilizational crisis in the form of climate change and other ecological basic crises of the ecosystems. This is indisputable, undeniable, unless you're absolutely on the payroll, and there's a few in that category. So what we've had is a UN process that started 20 years ago, or a little over 20 years ago now, that tried to map out what was going on, and they convened the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which reviewed all the scientific data. So it's important, some of these acronyms, to stick if you want to have further study and further awareness. This there's always in the news, it's depicted as China and the US are arguing they won't come to a climate agreement. In fact, the analysis of our comrade in the Philippines, Walden Bello, I think is absolutely spot on. This argument is theater. What's really going on is these companies are completely doing business with each other. They want business as usual, so the diplomats pretend to have an argument, but they really want to carry on the way things are going. There's a small wing, a weak wing of the business community that understands there's a crisis, but they're not powerful enough to stop the juggernaut corporations in retail, manufacturing, but particularly energy, that are driving a different agenda. Uh-oh. Here we go. What do I do?
Just right-click the mouse and then hit next.
Okay, I've got to do this every time.
The arrow started working again. So.
Oops. Am I there? I'm left-handed, that's the problem. Do you mind? Right-click for a left-handed person is surprisingly difficult. Okay. So some of the big environmental groups and many small governments have been fighting for a legally binding agreement. The role of the US is to support a voluntary agreement. Everybody should do what they can. And we all know what voluntary agreements mean in practice. They actually don't work. So this is Todd Stern, the special envoy for climate change for Obama. They've largely sort of parroted the interests of the fossil fuel companies. No, this is,
just with the arrow twice.
No. Do you mind? I'm sorry, I might give you the next one. So in bringing it up to date, in 2013, last November, the talks basically collapsed. Governments who volunteered emissions reductions, like Canada and Japan, even those minimal reductions that they pledged, they pulled back from them and said, we can't do it now, it's too expensive, we got jobs to worry about. And the jobs argument is central to their inaction. So the Great Inaction is very much tied to an economic argument, the argument that we need growth and we need jobs. Thanks, Lara. So a politically significant moment, which prefaces what's rest of my comments, is that the unions and the environmental organizations walked out of the talks, largely in disgust. They've been hanging in there, trying to get action, ambitious action on climate change, trying to get workers' rights, decent work, embedded in the new agreement, in the text of the new agreement. They failed. The attitude of the governments was basically, we're not going to do anything on climate change, they need, except make long speeches, and therefore they all walked out. Next one. And they committed to build a people's-led climate movement. This is, I think, the point of departure for the real sort of the serious discussion we have. Now, in this paper that is in draft form, Unions, Climate Change and the Great Reaction, I've tried to do an analysis of what unions have done around climate change in the last 10 or 15 years. And I'm proposing, I think everybody in this room will agree, that we need a programmatic shift for obvious reasons. One is, what's happening now in the so-called green economy or green transition is not adequate. Where every little green example you see, every little windmill, don't be fooled that this is solving the problem. It's having such an incremental effect that the big picture is being lost by some of the greenwashing and green advertising around it. So we need something that's really effective. We also need to do it in a way that is a trade union way, that builds working class and trade union power in the workplace, but also in politics and in society. We have to now, at this stage, challenge the political economy of capitalism using environmental arguments. There are many reasons to argue against capitalism, but in my view, none is more strong than the ecological crisis, because there are no jobs on a dead planet. The system itself cannot modify itself, it's absolutely clear, to be truly sustainable. There's a body of theory out there called ecological modernization. I explain it in the paper a little bit more for those who are interested. The idea that you can dematerialize growth, it's a myth. And all the evidence suggests that we need fundamental, deep restructuring of political economy. And that needs to be done by us in the movement, by asserting social ownership and democratic control of key sectors, of which energy is one of the most, if not the most important sector. Thanks, Lara. Okay, so it's time, we suggest in this project for an independent trade union approach. This is one of the problems we've got. This is Achim Steiner, the head of the United Nations Environment Programme. In its own language, the goal is to mobilize private capital behind the green economy. It works on the belief, consistent with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, that the public sector is kind of dead. Public budgets are basically empty, and what we need to do is incentivize the green economy, giving signals to the market, getting private capital to move in. So this is the message. And you can't do that with a pessimistic message. You have to say, you guys in fossil fuels, investing in fossil fuels, you're the past. Green economy, renewable energy, we're the future. So get with the program, start investing, if you're an investor, in the green economy. And they've been banging that drum now for years and years, even though, and it wasn't in Lara's slide, renewable energy investment has gone down for the third consecutive year. It's about 30% lower than it was in 2012. It needs to be double, triple, quadruple where it is at the present level to have any impact on the global climate or the energy system. So this is one of the problems we've got. Next slide, please. Now, it directly influences trade union politics. In which way? First of all, you'll see these logos here. United Nations Environment Programme, ITUC, International Labour Organization are among them. What are the policies they're putting forward is captured most recently in this document. Working towards sustainable development, opportunities for decent work and social inclusion in a green economy. The ITUC, and I have deep respect for many people in the ITUC who are trying to do their best for workers, don't get me wrong, but they went to Rio de Janeiro for the Rio +20 conference and they rolled out this document. And it got a visceral reaction from unions from the global south, from the social movements, who said the green economy is just basically another form of capitalist political economy leading to more exploitation of nature, modification of the atmosphere, and we need a different approach. Here's a quote from that, this is the actual quote from the ILO, saying that the role of governments is to incentivize private markets. This is the level, I think, of the political crisis that we're facing as a movement, when this body of ideas have such influence over many major trade unions. And that's where we need a programmatic shift. Next, please. Now, energy is crucially important. Emissions from energy are the leading source of global warming pollution. It's not the only source. We know that use of land, the use of the development of certain types of agriculture. We know the compromising of carbon sinks, where the Earth is not able, due to concrete everywhere, due to drought, is not able to absorb carbon. We know there's a problem. But the key, the source of it, is the energy system, the burning of fossil fuels. If we go on a business as usual trajectory, more and more fossil fuels, it is planetary death. And that means in the lifetime of children born today, there will be a catastrophic outcome. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So, for unions, and the reason why we've launched Unions for Energy Democracy is to address this. Business as usual is simply not an option. We cannot muddle on and hope someone else is going to take care of the problem. So, resist. We have to stop what the International Energy Agency calls carbon lock-in. If we carry on building more and more fossil fuel power stations, for example, like there are 288 gigawatts, I won't go into what gigawatts are, of coal-based coal-fired power generation coming online in the world in the next few years. If that type of build-out of fossil fuels is allowed to happen, we are locked in to global warming in a way that would be hugely expensive to try to scrap everything and go into a different direction. Reclaim. Key to this, the failure of the market to develop renewable energy in a way that's equitable is absolutely clear. Where renewable energy is moving forward, it's moving forward with public money and in the public sector, almost invariably. So we need to reclaim what's been privatized and to also demarketize public companies. Many public companies, like Eskom in South Africa, Sinopec in China, the big Russian and Indian companies, many of them are either state-owned or parastatals, partly state-owned. These companies, though, behave like private multinationals. So the struggle, however difficult it is to demarketize public companies, to return them to the public good and under democratic control. But it's also true that centralized power generation is arguably not the best way to go anymore. That there's huge potential for on-site generation in the form of solar, photovoltaics, small wind, small hydro. We can decentralize the energy system, but at the moment it's just an idea. It's happening here and there, but to do it to the speed and the scale we need it under democratic control and social ownership. In the way that there was the rural electrification programs of the United States and other countries was a model really of the sort of scale and ambition that we need to address the climate crisis with renewable energy. Now, Unions for Energy Democracy, let's be honest what we're up against here. We understand that the task of taking on the fossil fuel companies, bringing them into public ownership, restructuring the system, deploying renewables under worker and community control, this is a massive historical task. It's as massive as any task we've discussed at the GLI Summer School in the past 3 days. Absolutely certain. So we have to begin with a realistic sense of what's possible. And our belief is, if we pull people together, such as the unions in this room, and say we acknowledge what is going on in the climate system, in the energy system, we know business as usual is not an option. We understand also that private markets, unlike what the ILO and sometimes the ITUC says, is not going to be the main way of dealing with this crisis. We understand that we need an independent trade union approach. So this is our role is to pull unions together who generally concur with this assessment. And then we have to work on what we're trying to do as a movement in terms of proposing concrete policies. These were little clips, by the way, of our newsletter called Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, and it's a bulletin that many of you are on already, so look out for it in your email. So, who's involved? We started the program in October 2012 in New York. We invited a lot of unions to come. And most unions, well, faced with the facts, and many of them were fully aware of the facts already. It wasn't necessary for us to go down that road or to restate that. It was already clear. Many unions felt that, yes, we need a project that pulls unions together. So we've literally been going union by union, country by country, to get unions involved. And I'll just tell you what it means to be involved. The first thing is you have to say that we publicly identified with this project and this need. We acknowledge the challenge. Secondly, we want unions to designate somebody to serve as a liaison in the union. When unions are faced with so many other fights and challenges, this is a commitment that has to be made if the project's going to be helpful. Many unions have responded very positively to this. So you can see we've had now about 33 unions, including 4 global union federations. I'm pleased to say ITF, PSI, Education International, IUF are all engaged in the project. We have national trade union centers. Canadian Labour Congress, CTA International in Argentina, the Korean Federation we heard from this morning, KCTU, Centro APL in the Philippines, and one or two others are in negotiations with us about this. I got an email from COSATU this morning saying they want to be formally involved in the project. Let's discuss the details on Skype. So they're very encouraging piece of news. So there's, as you can see from this, these are just logos. What do they mean? It's at the moment we're just trying to pull together a project where we can debate, come together, exchange ideas and analysis, and begin to affect change. We've already seen the Trade Union Confederation of Americas take up the demand for democratic control over energy. This is something that it took them a year to do. Many big unions in the global north and the south are equally saying that we should be reasserting public ownership, that the era of privatization has been failed the planet and failed the workers and failed communities. Next, please. A few more logos. You'll see there's some prominent one from the global south, NUMSA, the Oilfield Workers Union in Trinidad and Tobago, the largest union in the Caribbean. Next. So I just want to sort of close with a clip. This is Naomi Klein speaking to a merger of two unions in Canada, the Communication, Energy and Paper Workers and the Canadian Auto Workers. And she made a speech on unions and climate change that made a reference to TUED and GLI, so I thought it would be a nice way to end the presentation to show that we're influencing at least some people who have some voice and some presence in the left. So just want
And we could build on that. The fast food strikes in the U.S. could be the first uprising in a sustained rebellion fighting for both real wages and real food, one in which the health of workers and the health of society are inextricably linked. So I hope it's clear by now that I'm not talking about a few token green jobs here. This is about a green labor revolution, an epic vision for healing our country from the ravages of the past 30 years of neoliberalism and healing the planet at the same time. This transition needs to be publicly managed. And that means everything from new crown corporations in energy to a huge redistribution of power, infrastructure, and investment. A democratically controlled, decentralized energy system operated in the public interest. This agenda is increasingly being called energy democracy. Sean Sweeney from the Global Labor Institute at Cornell, which is doing really the most visionary work in this area, is here today. And he's been working with many fine unions, including the CEP, to articulate what an energy democracy agenda would look like. And it's very exciting. It's time to bring this to Canada. And the slogan, "Power to the People," is a fantastic place to start.
So that sounds like a shameless plug, but it was actually the desire was to show. But the lead up to that speech is actually interesting. I'll close on this. There was Naomi Klein is writing a book called The Message. It's about climate denial in the left. It's quite a very interesting book about how we're so busy defending workers and that we haven't got any time for the ecology or environment. That's going to be on the long list of other things. If we get to it, we'll get to it. But we're far too short-sighted, short-staffed to do it. What she says is that this issue is a weapon that unions can pick up. And if they use this weapon right, it will help them with all the other things we're fighting for as a trade union movement, for a truly sustainable, worker-friendly, human-centered society. And that if we pick it up in that way and understand the urgency, then we can make some real progress as a movement. We will not, she says, and I paraphrase quite closely, we will have no problem asking ourselves about our relevance in the 21st century if we take up this issue. Because there's no power in society capable of galvanizing a movement to really bring about a truly sustainable, low carbon, equitable society than the trade union movement. And all the other movements out there are trying, but they really need labor, and labor leads those movements in order to bring about this change. So this was the message that Naomi Klein communicated to the unions in Canada, and I'm happy to share the link at a later time. So thanks for putting this on the plenary and having this a chance to talk.
Thanks very much, Sean and Lara. I'm now going to hand it over to Gary Smith from the GMB, who I said is the National Secretary for the Energy and Utilities section of the GMB, which is the third largest union in the UK. So take it away, Dan.
Thanks very much, colleagues and friends. Thanks very much for having me here today. And following on for Lara and Sean, I'm not really sure what I can say. In terms of trying to summarise what I'm going to talk about, first of all, I need to make clear to an international audience I'm talking from the UK context and a UK experience. And what I will discuss with you is...
we can't wait for government to come.
Sorry, she's there.
I will talk about a concern that I think some of us in our trade unions certainly have, and I know this resonates with many of our activists in the energy sector, and that is that the British left has got sucked into what is fundamentally a bourgeois green agenda that on the surface looks somehow radical, but is actually deeply reactionary and has had a negative impact on ordinary people in the country. I'll try and keep my comments rooted in the economics of the real world, and as a trade union official who has to live and deal with the real world, as opposed to the world we might aspire to live in. And I think as I go through my contribution, I do want to talk to you about the fact that much of this debate is actually passing workers in the energy sector by. They're not interested, they're not engaged, or it doesn't resonate with them. And that's dangerous, and it's very, very unhelpful. And in trying to draw my remarks to a conclusion, I'll talk about the challenges that we face in trying to unite around the working class agenda. A lot of our focus is on which technologies are the right ones in terms of energy. I'm not sure that's something that we're ever going to be able to agree on, but fundamentally I think where we can agree, and I've absolutely no disagreement with Sean and Lara, and that is around the key issue of ownership and control, which has been lost in a lot of the green debate, I'm afraid, in the UK. So really in kicking off, we need to remember that energy is a good thing, it's positive, and that people don't want to live in yurts or teepees or mud huts. People want to have energy because it liberates people. It's about work, it's about education, it's about health. So it's something positive, and we shouldn't see it as somehow negative in the way that some in the green movement sometimes portray it. We do also have to recognise, however, that there is no simple solution to how we create the energy that the planet needs. And from a UK perspective, the suggestion that we are going to produce the electricity that we need to light our homes, or the energy we need to heat our homes, and run industry, and run our schools and our health service, the idea that we'll produce all this energy from wind, solar or tidal, I'm afraid, is absolutely fanciful. The discussion about green jobs, let me tell you that in the UK context, those green jobs are by and large an absolute myth. There are probably more tooth fairies and Santa's little helpers out there than there are green jobs, whatever the wind industry would like to tell us. And the fact is about renewables, they're expensive. That's the truth of the matter. And much of the green movement, and I'm sorry to lump everybody together because I understand there's different sections within the Greens. I'm not convinced about some of the radical stuff, we'll come back to that in a minute. But much of the green movement attacked nuclear, about the huge subsidies for the nuclear industry. We're a big union in nuclear, the largest union. We've never hidden for the fact that the nuclear industry is heavily dependent on subsidy, but so is the renewable sector. And now that that's become apparent, the agenda has been driven by the right, who are saying that this stuff is far too costly. There was a lack of honesty and integrity about the costs associated with renewables. And the rollout of renewables in the UK is actually one of the most regressive forms of taxation the country has possibly ever seen. And where I disagree with you, Lara, I've got to say, is that big energy in the UK is entirely pragmatic. They don't care where they're making the money. If they make the money in the North Sea, that's fantastic. If the EDF can make money building a nuclear power station in Somerset, happy days. if they can make money putting up wind farms or solar panels with huge subsidies, they will happily do that as well. So the renewable sector is actually, through the subsidy mechanisms, sucked huge amounts of money from the poorest people in the country, the people who can least afford to heat their homes, and stuffed it into the pockets of both big energy and these shiny entrepreneurial types that have popped up around the energy sector who tell us they're concerned about climate change but are actually more interested in how they're going to make money on their investments in the City of London. In terms of the story about jobs in the UK, well, what is it? Or jobs in the renewable sector in the UK? Solar panels are invariably made in China, and wind turbines are made in Germany or Denmark. They're connected using Chinese cables, and they're brought over here using Dutch boats and barges. So in terms of the position for working class people in the UK, the renewable sector in reality has been about higher energy bills and very, very little else. The actual work created in the energy sector has been for a lot of shiny-faced entrepreneurial types who like to tell you they're somehow radical, actually secretly want to be the next Richard Branson, and middle-class lobbyists who spend their whole time batting around the next big idea that is going to revolutionise and transform the energy sector. We have one Green MP in the country, Caroline Lucas. People tell me she's radical and she's a socialist. I'm sure in her own heart she is. She comes to our conference and talks about 1 million green jobs. Doesn't resonate with our workers who work in the energy sector, because we're going to shut down the nuclear industry, we're winding down the gas industry, and we're going to snuff out what is left of the coal industry in the UK. Her agenda, and that radical green agenda, this hogwash about millions of green-collar jobs, was actually a recipe for mass unemployment and misery for working class people, and the energy workers see through it. That's the truth of the matter. Now, by the way, before you all think I'm some reactionary right-wing old union official, well, maybe I am. Personally, one from my union tells me I am. This is a union which doesn't talk about green jobs. We organise workers in green-collar jobs insofar as they do exist. Smart metering workers, I would include them people who are going to conserve and save energy. The only union who's involved in national negotiations for the smart metering sector. We negotiate on behalf of workers who insulate homes. I think we're the only union who's dealing with those types of national negotiations. Hundreds of those workers. By the way, low paid, low quality, low skilled jobs, low quality work. That's the truth of the matter. And in terms of our track record as a union, we have a record that is second to none, fighting for safety. And it sickens me when I listen to some of these green people telling us about the environment. Where were they when we were fighting over asbestos? Where were we when we were fighting about decent standards of safety? Protesting about closing the industry down as it grew up. We were in there organising workers, improving, transforming the fortunes of working people who were in those industries. And on the question of asbestos, by the way, many thousands of our workers, our members, have died as a result of asbestos. I think it's still at peak as the biggest killer of working class people in Western Europe. We also represented workers in the asbestos factories, as well as the workers in the shipyards and power stations who were being killed by the stuff. And we knew we had to support the end of that industry. We couldn't support an industry where there was a few hundred workers making asbestos products that was killing thousands of workers out there in the real world. So we've taken a principled stand, we've organised workers when it's difficult, and I think we've got a very proud track record in what we do. But part of my responsibility, or part of what I'm trying to bring to you today, is the complexities about the arguments and to articulate that there are no simple solutions to this huge challenge that we face. In terms of gas, and it was very interesting what you said, I'm delighted that Unite took such a principled stand over fracking. I look forward to Unite giving up their recognition agreements in the North Sea in the Centrica gas fields, and we will happily take on board those workers and organise them and look after them on your behalf. Because unfortunately, the real world will be far more complicated than Unite passing a resolution. We organise thousands of gas workers, and here's the reality of the economics of gas in the UK. For those of you who are not from the UK, don't be fooled by this sunshine. This is a wet, miserable island. And where he comes from on the west coast of Scotland is even more wet and miserable. Trust me, go there and visit. 80% of homes are heated by gas. Most people in this country heat their homes using gas central heating. Gas is, a unit of gas is about 4 or 5 times cheaper than a unit of electricity. Now, the Labour Party, we're talking about how we're going to move by 2030 to heating our homes by electricity, new clean green electricity. That's the green agenda as well. The reality is it won't happen. And here's why it won't happen. You're going to say to ordinary people, rip out your gas heating, replace it with electric heating at the cost of thousands of pounds, and watch your bill go up 4 or 5-fold. And by the way, on top of that, we're going to have to put massive investment into the electricity infrastructure to keep the thing working. It's absolutely bloody cloud cuckoo land, I tell you. It's an unfortunate and inconvenient truth, to use that, or to paraphrase Al Gore. So, look, I'll be given a hurry up. I'll be danger of going on forever here. We do have a massive challenge. That's about how we heat our homes in the UK, how we deal with where we're going to get our energy from in the UK. And I think the fact is, if the economics of fracking, and nobody knows if there is gas under the ground, we're all getting very excited about it. If the economics of fracking add up, we will be extracting that gas in the UK. And then we will have a choice, and this will be Hobson's choice for Unite. We either end up with a position like the Scottish North Sea. Workers die in the Scottish North Sea in a way they don't in the Norwegian North Sea. Workers are paid less money in the Scottish North Sea than they are in Norway. The money that we've earned from the Scottish North Sea has invariably gone in a big pipe down through to America. The Norwegians, on the other hand, have invested it for the long-term interest of their country. And so if fracking does take off, the unions have a choice. We either walk away from it, or we organise workers within the fracking sector. So in conclusion then, we've got a hugely fragmented energy sector in the UK, owned by Chinese financial institutions, Canadian pension funds, and all the rest of that. And the starting point for any debate about the environment and about energy will have to be around how we bring our energy sector back together. Bring it back together under democratic control and management. Because if we don't have that, if we don't have public ownership, everything else is academic. So what I would encourage colleagues, it's all very easy for us all to get emotional about the future of the planet. I understand that, I'm passionate about it myself, but we need a sober debate, because the danger is we will end up talking to ourselves on the left. We need to come up with a programme and arguments that resonates with people's experience in the real world, and that can unite workers, and particularly those workers in the energy sector, behind. And people struggling to pay the bills. So let's try and build a consensus around the issues that we agree about, but please believe me, this ain't simple.
Thanks for that, Gary. And I think it's very apt that this debate comes in between two very important discussions. One about the death of the international socialist tendency and the failure of social democracy to actually deliver for working people. I think one of the biggest failures of social democracy in terms of delivering for working people is in the climate and the complete destruction of our climate, particularly in the global south. I think it's also very apt that this comes before we start to conclude and solidify our vision, our political vision for how we go forward as a movement. So I think, the key questions here are, can and should the environment movement and the environmental movement play a part in that vision? How are we going to bring workers and environmental activists together? Are they the same thing? How do we, as Gary said, how do we fight back against monopoly ownership, we should both be or we should all be fighting against this kind of monopoly ownership, which forced out one of my good comrades, Mark Lyons, in Scotland, when Jim Ratcliffe, the dictator of INEOS, decided that he was going to hold 1,000 workers and an entire country to ransom for the purposes of his own benefit, financial benefit. So how do we ensure that public ownership is on? Because I know they've got more expert analysis. Yeah, let's open it up to questions. I'll take 3, let them come back, and then so on. So I think I'll let Industry Energy come in first of all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to. This was a lot of information on one time, so I'll try to go through this chronologically. I would like to thank you all for your input. I had the honor to talk to Sean and Lara last night briefly on this topic. And you, Gary, you bring in the workers. You are bringing the workers' voice in this, and we organize. By the way, we in Industry Energy we organize both offshore and onshore industry, which means both aluminium, oil, gas. We don't have fracking. The problem we often meet in Norway, which I didn't experience now, is with environmental activists that they are talking about this dream of a green industry in the future, which they feel that don't exist today. But the problem with gaining support in Norway with that is that it does exist today. I'm proud to come. Aluminium. Not go the full story with it now, but during the financial crisis, it's actually also been a tragedy. Over a bill, I won't tell you the full story if you ask me later. And the second problem is that they won't get normal people to join them with the kind of rhetoric they use back in Norway. That's why the Green Party in Norway is only at 2% or something. Very few people support them because they don't give them real-life solutions. And what we talked about, Sean, is that you said that the most important part was gaining democratic control over natural resources. Important electricity. I think that would be the first point to start off with, which all unions in the whole world would agree on. And it is that alone is a huge task in many countries. Even in Norway, we have, because we have almost only water energy, which is mostly owned publicly, but it's also being privatized. We export energy to Germany, and we import back lights. Yeah, and with a 5% loss of energy both ways in the cables. That's why I think that gaining democratic control and having smart methods of using energy on short distances has to be possible. And also, we have to gain public control for companies, which means Lara put this really nice. For those that know that Statoil is state oil company of Norway, but she said that that's the public company run like a private company, which is we have to make sure that the leaders, the CEOs of these companies run them for people and by people, which means that when the CEO of Statoil says that he will move 300 jobs in IT to Latvia or India or whatever to pay them less, then the Prime Minister of Norway has to call into his office and say, "Hi, I own this company on behalf of the people, you cannot act in that way." Which would be the same with fracking, although he is involved in fracking in Canada. And also, one thing you didn't mention, which is extremely important in large parts of the world, is, which has, Gary mentioned it briefly, the taxation of companies, making the profits from the companies being used both in green energy and also for clean water and other things that will benefit the society. In Africa, they have a huge battle to fight on this with the mining companies and with energy companies, which is polluting those environments. So I will say that the key to getting workers to join you is you are actually grasping it, which not many environmental activists in Norway will do, is that you have to talk about problems that normal people can relate to, that they can feel that, wow, this time the environmental activist is not trying to shut down my workplace, they're trying to make my day a better day to live. Yeah. I'll take a stop there, and you can also, over there or something, challenge me on this.
So I think Elliot from GMB was next.
So first, I just want to say, obviously, I'm very proud to have Gary and I union. GMB does great work. And also, yeah, the other two presentations were excellent, I thought, as well. The problem that I have to see, and it is a big problem, is even if we do manage to renationalise power companies, and we have the problem that the capitalists still own the technology that makes this possible, in terms of solar, in terms of wind, in terms of battery units. So until we can get that into public ownership as well, actually we are still in the same situation where we might control the companies, but we still can't afford it. And also, you know, that's a massive problem going forwards that I can see in the whole sector. And also, I don't know if Gary could talk a little bit more. Obviously, in the UK, this year was talked about £120 subsidy on the average bill in the UK. And I know a lot of that money goes into nuclear and development. I just wondered if Gary knew a little bit more, and talk a little bit more about that. I'd be really interested tonight.
Yep, yourself, brother. Yep.
Okay.
Coming from Romania.
Peter Damo, Independent Trading Federation in Romania. I have an issue to raise to Sean. Probably you know that Chevron is coming into Romania and Bulgaria now, and we had in both countries, and especially in Romania, we had some opposition and ground-rooted opposition. I mean, actually, people, peasants around the places where the Chevron wanted to start the so-called research. Now, it's the phase of research. All right. Now, I want to connect to what Sean has said, that you have a number of global unions and global federations that have joined the TUED. Yeah. All right. One of them is, as you mentioned, and I want you to correct me because otherwise it makes no sense. My question problem makes no sense. You said it's Education International. Is that true?
That's correct, yes. All
right. Now, if that is correct, my question comes to you and to all of us, because I want to solve it somehow, some way. We have the other two big traditional federations, teachers' federations in Romania. They are affiliated to Education International, but they have never communicated the fact that their Education International is supporting TUED, and I cannot explain this, but only by saying that they are working together with the government. And on one hand, they are blocking this information, and on the other hand, they are not doing what their international federation actually has signed with you. So then I want to be practical, not to say pragmatic. I would like to have from you a proof that international education has signed this agreement with you, and I would like to confront them in Romania by saying, why don't you communicate this, and whom are you protecting? So I would like to have from you just, I don't know, a mail or something that the international education is part of this. And then I would confront them in Romania with this, secrecy.
So I'll let the panel come back on that question, and if Gary wants to come back on Elliot's question.
Do you want to take a couple more?
Well, we will. Right.
We'll start in the middle. Yeah, yourself. Yeah.
So I'm Jenny. I'm from Sheffield Climate Alliance. So we're a local organisation, and understanding the climate crisis as put forward by what Lara said, but working with trade unions to actually look at how climate jobs can actually address that in our city. And I wanted to draw to your attention at some reports which were done for British cities and the regions around them, which were called Mini Stern. So Stern Review was an economic report about the costs of tackling or not tackling climate change. And this was done, a mini, small one, just for our area, to look at the cost of what it would be to actually invest in those things. And what that showed was that if you invested the right amount of money in the right kind of programme, you could, for Sheffield, the Sheffield City region, about 2 million people, area of about 2 million people, you could save £1 billion a year on energy bills, which would no longer, as Gary said, go out along that pipe to somewhere else, to the City of London or to the US or wherever it may go, but would stay in our local economy. So what we're trying to understand and trying to get to happen in our area is how can we actually get the money invested to do that work. And the other thing that report showed was that if you did that investment, you would get over 6,000 jobs created in our area. And that really outweighs anything else that I've seen in terms of fracking or open cast coal or any of the other things I talked about in terms of energy in our area. And it's quite simple things that would be done, like insulating people's homes. I used to work with people in fuel poverty, including migrant families who maybe come to live in Sheffield and are living in really terrible housing, in rented accommodation, and they're spending loads of money on their energy bills, but the energy isn't actually heating their home, it's just heating the street because the heat's being lost. So we actually need the work to be done. So about a third of the money we need to invest is to make people's homes able to keep warm, to have really bad housing. And others is about making businesses more energy efficient. It's also about renewable energy. It's about making transport systems more effective and more energy efficient, which also means jobs in the transport industry. In making industrial processes and businesses more energy efficient, which again means more, it's all jobs. And it's keeping that money then circulating. It's about cutting our energy bills by about a third, and also cutting our greenhouse gases by enabling us to do that by 40% in our region over the timescale we need to do that. So I just wanted to throw that in. Those reports exist for several cities and being created for more. And I would like your help, and I'd really like Gary's help to think about, so how do we actually get the trade unions on board with that? How can we work with the labour movement to get that to happen?
Thanks, Esther. And the colleague from Bangladesh? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Ripon Chaudhary. I'm from Bangladesh Petroleum Congress, which is a confederation still part of the ITC. First of all, I'd like to thank the speakers, Lara and Sean, and the comrades from UK, for presenting the overview about the climate and energy issues and the current trading positions and actions at the global scale. So my questions is to Sean and Lara, especially. So according to your presentations, it gives us where we are now in this issue. So can you just give us some your assessments about, because we are working in the ITUC and the trade unions in the US together with the common trade union positions and advocating with that and working in that directions in the trade union part. So what are the deficits in the current trade union positions we have right now in the top level we have been working for many years? So some points if you can give us your assessments. And second one is to our colleagues from UK about I know that in the UK there are some programs, green workplace and some training engagement in the workplace. And similarly, we've been working with the Children Congress of UK and Bangladesh Children Congress to promote the trade union participation on industrialization framework and involving trade union and building a common position on climate change and job issues. So, what is the UK experience from the ground level on industrialization and green workplace practices? Can you give us some more concrete examples that can be a lesson learned for other commerce from the different regions, how we can have a broader, not trade union combined solidarity and action on climate change and industrialization and green actions. Thank you.
Thanks. Graham from UCU.
Graham Peterson from UCU. We're one of the unions that signed up for the 1 million climate jobs pamphlet, so whether we've been sucked into a reactionary bourgeois agenda.
Definitely, brother.
But I think Gary's actually, my comments are mainly aimed at Gary, that he's actually presented some really important challenges that have got to be addressed. Because unions that haven't got members in the energy sector have actually got to understand the kinds of concerns and the issues that they're faced with. And that's why there is, the international trade union movement has put so much stress on this concept of a just transition. But if we are going to move to a low carbon economy, then it does have to be done in a way that actually reflects the needs of those workers. And if you want a perfect example of where it hasn't been done properly, there are so many, but an obvious one would be, say, the Polish coal industry and what's happened to mine workers in Poland. But that having been said, I mean, I think one thing that I would be interested in, though, as far as the GMB is concerned, is if the GMB does accept the scientific evidence, and particularly the evidence that suggests that only around 20% of the current reserves can actually be safely burned or used if we're going to stick within the kinds of limits that scientists say we need to, then what kind of strategy, I mean, is the GMB putting together a kind of transitionary strategy to actually move out of oil and gas? Because he gave a very good example of what happened in the asbestos industry, where the GMB did have a lot of members, and it was important jobs for workers. But the asbestos industry wasn't sustainable, and therefore there had to be a need to transition out of that. I'd just like to know if the same approach is being taken as far as the oil and gas industry is concerned.
The sister in the middle, yourself, yeah?
I'm Stevie O'Neill from the UK. A couple of points. One, Gary was talking about how so much of the equipment that's used for the renewable industry, the wind turbines and so on, is manufactured elsewhere. Well, Jenny and I are from Sheffield, and one of the things we try to also discuss in our city. This is a steel city, one of the main early industrial revolution cities of the world, producing all sorts of things that later got exported, but the industry as itself got exported elsewhere in latter decades. Well, what we would like is that actually we bring back some of that production to Sheffield. And so rather than just have a sort of a negative attitude that where that production now comes from, actually Sheffield is one of those places in the UK where we could be creating jobs. We have the skills. Still, there is a memory. We do have steel still going on. It could be producing a lot more of this equipment that we need. And we need to have the trade unions behind that kind of agenda as well, pushing on management. Second thing is perhaps more related to trade unions, the global north, as it were, but we do have to address the question of the pension funds. There's a lot of trade unions do have their pension funds invested in fossil fuels, and that needs addressing as well. If we're talking about reducing the power of these corporations, then that is one way to do it. And there are a couple of arguments there. One is that we would be, as trade unionists, much more akin then to what is happening, for example, with the churches who are divesting, universities are divesting, the city of Oxford, I believe, has just said as a city it's divesting. So this is a movement that's going on. I know that NUMSA in South Africa has a pension fund which had divested from fossil fuels. So it's not just the global north. So that's an area. There's a financial argument behind it, apparently. Don't ask me, I don't know nothing about maths, but it's called the carbon bubble, which is actually the investments will, at some point, start to not be financially viable anyway, as the fossil fuel industry starts to implode. That's called the carbon bubble theory. You have to go read the science behind that, I can't tell you. But so those are just a couple of thoughts I had coming out And just one more, which is almost, this is about ourselves as consumers. That there's, and I know this comes from, you know, a very green sort of perspective, and doesn't always get received well when I say it. And I know that I've been challenged by green friends of mine sometimes about this, but each of us actually has a responsibility in terms of how we consume. And I don't see the trade union movement taking that up quite enough for me anyway, because almost still buying into the theory that we just need more growth for the economy. Actually, it's only certain types of growth that we should be backing, not growth with a capital G, and that includes ourselves as consumers.
Thanks, Esther. I'm going to let Lara and Sean come back on some of those questions, and then let Gary come in as well. So,
Okay. I'll just, can I stand? Is that okay? I'll just take up a couple of points about the Ripon's question, if that's okay, on the ITUC. I mean, let's go back, like when the ITUC started going to the climate talks, it was 5 or 6 people. What do they see? They see corporations, governments, and NGOs, mainly environmental and other NGOs. So when faced with that challenge, the way to get into the debate with any workers' interest is to make it simple. Just transition, decent work. This is the trade union agenda around environments, the ILO's agenda around, and they plugged away at that tenaciously with some success. A lot of people talk about just transition now. Decent work is accepted around the world as at least a desirable goal. But if we face up to what's happening, is A, the UN climate talks have not produced an agreement. So you can have language and agreement, but if there is no agreement, the language stays in the cupboard. Secondly, it's not sufficiently transformative. If we're just going to support the green capitalist agenda as opposed to the fossil fuel capitalist agenda, we are basically not fulfilling our historic role in fighting for a better and truly sustainable society. We're assuming that green capitalism is going to solve the job. And this is a debate going on in the trade unions right now, in the global trade union movement, about can the system itself be modified sufficiently to become green. So when we talk about the deficiencies, very rarely do unions at the peak level talk about renationalizing or reasserting public ownership as part of the solution to the ecological and the social crises. They don't do it, but it's beginning to change. Unions in Canada, CUPE, Unifor, utility workers in the United States, many unions in Argentina, South Africa, some of the unions, certainly in Asia, are beginning to say we need to reclaim what was privatized and reorganized in a way that we have expand the public sector under democratic control. It's an old socialist agenda mixed with a new ecological agenda. So it's eco-socialism in my view, and it's a current of opinion that's rising in the movement. I'll just take a couple of quick points in addition to that. I'll take up the brother about the Education International offline, if that's okay. I can explain to you what's happening with that, and Lara can do the same. On the issue of cost Gary raised, I think Gary did a fantastic job at demolishing the green agenda and why it has very little to do with a working class trade union agenda. But as others said, Graham and others, we have to have our own agenda, and we cannot allow business as usual to continue. So we have to struggle, and part of this discussion is to struggle with what kind of program should we be putting forward that addresses the needs of workers in the industry, grows renewables under social ownership, but also it advances energy conservation and truly sustainable lifestyles. That's what we've got to do as a movement. So, but one issue I think is the issue of price. The reason why renewable energy is expensive, if you look at the breakdown of the costs, it's the financing, it's the power purchase agreements, the public-private partnerships. Renewable energy companies come in and say, you know, we've got a problem called climate change, don't you? You better do something about it because you've got a green movement out there that's asking questions of your government, and we need to do something about it. So guess what? We're going to bring you renewable energy, but we can't compete with fossil fuels, so you'll pay us double. So the profits are locked in for 30 years in power purchase agreements, public-private partnerships. If that was done in the public sector, public financing is cheaper. We can bring some of the supply chain issues back home where we try to do more manufacturing domestically. We can control energy conservation in a way that creates a lot of work, reduces energy demand, but does right by the peak workers already in the sector. We need that kind of bold thinking in the trade union movement that we then, Gary's point was right, a lot of this debate is missing workers. If we went out with that agenda and agitated and educated around that agenda, then we would get support. We would be talking in a language that ordinary working people understand, that they're not going to be kicked to the curb by a green agenda, but they're actually going to be part of the transition. And we're not talking about something that's going to happen in 3 years. This is a 20, 30-year transition program away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, done publicly, done democratically. So there are many other points to be raised about the debate. Please, if you're in a union that's not part of Unions for Energy Democracy, help us with this debate. We need your support and your involvement. So a plug for Chued there. Thanks.
In no particular, sorry.
No, because it makes sense to
okay.
do first.
No particular order. My friend from Bangladesh. First of all, my colleague Bert is here from the GMB. We're delighted to. I was hoping to stay tonight. I can't. I've got to deal with some gas workers. They're well paid. I've got to help make sure they're still well paid tomorrow. We'd be delighted to catch up and get some details or contact details from yourself. One of our senior shop stewards from the gas industry was recently in Bangladesh visiting factories to make sure the uniforms our members wear were as ethically made and sourced as possible. We've had a problem reaching out to the textile unions in Bangladesh, and we were very keen to do that. It's something that's very important to our members. In terms of your question, though, specifically about green reps in the workplace, I can only talk from my experience. I think they've made little or no difference whatsoever. I think it was a nice thing to talk about. The truth is, what is changing company behaviour is taxation and subsidies. So the reason Walmart, and we organise as the Walmart in the UK, the reason they have transformed the way that they manage waste and they manage their vehicle fleet is because of the cost of taxation. The government puts up tax on diesel, they try to become more efficient. The reason the car industry, or large chunks of the car industry, are covered in solar panels, and many factories are covered in solar panels, is not just to run the factory, it's because there was huge amounts of subsidies that went with those solar panels. So poor people are subsidising Nissan, Toyota, or whoever that slaps these panels on the roof. Or indeed wealthy middle class people who've got large south-facing roofs and who could afford £15,000 or £20,000 to put panels on the roof. The poor people down the road are paying for that. In terms of the point about the transition, and it is a good one. The government's estimates tell us that the North Sea has 40 years left oil and gas in the North Sea. Now, when I was a kid, they told us it was 25 years. They keep, every time they cut the tax, the industry managed to find another bubble of gas or more oil. And let me talk about the hypocrisy in terms of British politics, and with both in Scotland. The Scottish government says that we're going to be fired up in Scotland by renewables. What an absolute load of crap. 40% of the electricity in Scotland is generated through nuclear, but the Scottish Nationalist Government is anti-nuclear. And there is absolutely no danger that the Scottish Government is going to close down Aberdeen, or 140,000 jobs directly involved in the oil industry in Scotland. Neither are they going to tackle the issue of ownership of our oil and gas assets either, of course, because they say most of that money ends up in Texas, Houston, or wherever in the States. And they're certainly going to deal with the issue about workers' rights in the Scottish North Sea, because workers in the Scottish North Sea are paid less and treated far worse and are far more likely to die than workers in Norway, where there is at least a modicum of state control. I think there are ways that we can move from oil and gas. It will take longer than I suspect people would hope for or think, and there is a debate to be had about that and how it happens. But let me tell you, in terms of this just transition piece, I used to organise workers in Plymouth. But for those who don't know, it's a military town in the southwest of England. Poor working class town, based around the naval dockyard. When the Berlin Wall came down, workers were told there was going to be a just transition and a peace dividend. 15,000 people worked in the nuclear dockyard. There's now less than 5,000. Many of them are contractors. The transition for the people of Plymouth was low pay, unskilled employment, informal employment, 0 hours contracts and all the rest of that rubbish, whereas their forebearers worked in a dockyard where they were paid well. So workers are not stupid. They look at that type of example, and that's the transition they think they can expect when we move from a society based on carbon to this airy-fairy, I'm afraid, at the moment, green stuff that we're talking about. So there are things we can do. We need to prepare, we need to debate, but it needs to be a sober one. In terms of wind and Sheffield and steel, I'm sorry, we have missed the boat. It's gone. If I have another shiny-faced lobbyist in my office, or another shiny-faced entrepreneur who tells me how much they care about the planet, I'm going to wring their neck. They accept themselves the wind industry. Onshore wind was finished in the UK in terms of manufacturing. We missed the boat. That's the truth of the matter. We didn't own it. We didn't plan for it. We had no control over it. So the stuff was offshore. And those entrepreneurial types who were saying they cared about the environment weren't giving them monkeys where those turbines were produced. If you've got a German company like E.ON, where do you think they're going to source their turbines from? They're state influenced, if not state controlled. The turbines are coming from Germany. France has got less of a wind industry than us, or less wind farms than us, but they've got a bigger industry because companies like EDF are directed by the state and they'll produce their turbines in France. Now, it may not be sexy or popular in an audience like this, but where you are going to get jobs in Sheffield is in the nuclear industry supply chain. Sheffield Forge Masters is going to get a lot of work. There is a clear commitment from Nuclear New Build to support the UK manufacturing supply chain in a way that never happened in the renewables sector. And that's just the truth of the matter. And look at the facts around nuclear, by the way. We've built direct links with the French trade unions in nuclear. We have come up with the most progressive engineering construction agreement that this country has ever seen that will ensure workers in the industry are safer, have better social rights, are better paid than any other large-scale contract of this type. And we've done that through building solidarity directly with the trade unions. All isn't lost with wind, but I'm telling you, it's the idea that there's thousands of jobs going to be created is nonsense. They're talking about the jobs in Hull. Siemens are going to build a factory in Hull to make turbines. That will compensate for the hundreds of our members they sacked when they closed a factory in the northeast of England and moved the production of electricity components back to Germany. So in net effect, there will be no work created in it. So I'm sorry, but at the moment it's pie in the sky. Let me deal finally about the question about bills, and this is a very, very important one. Another myth buster for you. Everybody goes on about the big six. Labour politicians are on the TV with your bill. Most of the big six of the energy, the big six, we have 6 companies that dominate the energy sector in the UK. Most of them foreign owned. 2 of them are owned by UK, are owned in the UK. Most of them are foreign owned. Some of them are state owned by the French government and the German government. At least 3 of the big 6 lose money. They lose money selling energy to customers. EDF make money, but they only make money producing electricity. They lose money supplying energy to you. British Gas and SSE definitely make money. 3, possibly 4 of the big 6 lose money. So where does your money go? Well, there are a load of companies, probably 17 or 18, who control the pipes and cables in the ground. That's where a lot of the profit and the money is going. It's complicated, the ownership is complicated, none of the politicians understand that, and until you tackle that ownership and control issue, you're not going to do anything either about bills or indeed the climate. And in terms of the other, your bill, part of your bill does go to subsidise nuclear, a large part of your bill goes to subsidise the renewable sector, and a large part of it goes into insulating homes. But they've actually cut the programme for insulated homes. It's utter madness, the worst insulated homes in Europe, and we've cut back the programme. But the truth is, the money for subsidising renewables or nuclear or for insulated homes shouldn't have gone on to people's bills. It should have gone on to general taxation, because unless it's paid through general taxation, it's a regressive form of tax. And unfortunately, too many of our little green friends didn't want to face up to those type of issues.
I've already got, comrades, I've already got 5 speakers. I've got you, Lenny, down. So I'm going to let them come in, and we are really running against time, and I want to expand this into discussion groups. So I'm going to let Lara come back in after those 5 contributions. So Joshua, you were next.
Yeah, actually, a lot of the things I wanted to say was already said by Sean. But let me just add several points, 3 points. First, I mean, Thank you.
Stand on your chair.
First, it is possible to transition to renewable energy. We've seen that in Germany. So there might be a lot of problems with the way they did it, but it is possible. So my plea is that I think if you do the math, at the end of the day, there's no job in a dead planet. So if that is the case, then we must think of a way to do it. Now I understand the passion of the. I completely understand. I have my own membership in the coal plant in the Philippines, and they're really one of the highest paid members. They also live where these coal plants are set up, and in one city they're putting up 3 coal plants, and 2 of which is not intended to power the energy needs of that city, because 1 is enough. Other cities. So, which means our own in that union, they're saying that, well, why are we going to pay for the pollution? For the other. So, in other words, even if they have the highest paid job in my union, they have all agreed that it is important for them to fight coal and further locking in the country, at least in there, to further coal. So what am I saying? I'm just saying that the reason why they agree is because they understand very clearly that there is no way that my union will agree to having their company shut down without a just transition for them. So that's the second point. The third point has to do with ITUC's position. I'm glad that it is very seriously having its own positions, but my problem is the strategy. I think ITUC and many big unions have been putting so much premium on negotiating with these governments and these corporations and the UN, when obviously many of these bodies have already been captured by the corporations. So my point is that I think we should put more emphasis in explaining the problem to the people, to our members, and mobilizing our members out in the street and put pressure on them from the outside. And that's my problem with this whole, what was the name of the article? Volveremos statement. When they walked out, so Sean showed you that they walked out last year. But, fortunately, this year, they walked back in without any changes at all. No? And without any changes in the politics and any changes in the conditions, they walked back in. When I asked why, well, we were not prepared to stay out in the first place. Well, why did you walk out? So that is my problem with the ITUC position.
Thanks, Joshua. Lenny, you back?
Yeah, firstly, aren't we having kind of debate about something else? The way I understand it, the input from Sean and
Lara
is the planet is threatened by these changes in ecological systems, damaging, etc. And yet we can't get governments to do anything about it. They did it. So the question is, why can't we get governments and hold them accountable and have the political power to impose forced agreements across corporations across the world to make things happen? Now it seems like from that position, the answer is, well, let's the Naomi Klein position. Let's go to the trade unions because they can be a huge partner to help us do that. Now, unfortunately, the trade union movement is at its weakest in its history at this moment, under 6% in the US. The trade union movement has not been able to stop the destruction of jobs, the destruction of decent jobs, all of that. So we need a discussion on how do we mobilize to do the decent jobs. Let's accept contradictions. Let's accept the fact that we are going to find contradictions within that, but that's not in the past stopped us from building a movement and making significant gains, even though that there are contradictions. And one of the things about mobilizing and developing a political force is to, as Gary is saying, things need to resonate with ordinary people so that this can become something. Now, I think there are two things that resonate very deeply. That A, the same bastards who are destroying the planet are the people who are destroying people's jobs and everything else. Now, everybody can understand that. You don't need to resolve all the tensions between whether we can imagine a world in which every nuance has been resolved. We were socialists for 100 years. Nobody in this room knows what socialism is going to look like. That doesn't stop us from fighting for it. So let's accept that these are internal contradictions, but we don't have the political power to impose our will and establish means to resolve all the potential contradictions between what Gary is saying as a trade unionist and what you're saying legitimately. I mean, just the example that comes to mind in the anti-apartheid struggle. As NUMSA, we organized workers in a company called Denel, which is the arms company in South Africa. So we used to go on demonstrations and face the bullets of a company, some of our members who created the bullets. That didn't stop us from fighting against apartheid. I mean, the contradictions are part and parcel of that. You can organize fracking workers, but organize the fracking workers. But we need to have a political struggle to impose our will on these lousy bastards in government and so on, to have binding agreements on emissions, to have decent. This is a political struggle. Now, why are our political struggles weak at this moment? It may not be, unfortunately, that we can solve that, as Naomi tries to suggest, running to the union. Without addressing all the problems, we're trying to look at the last 3 days, while the unions weak also. These are the real kind of debates we should have.
Absolutely. Do any sisters have any questions or contributions that I've missed out? No? Leon?
Hi, Gary.
He's RMT, it's okay. Don't be scared, these are transport.
We haven't met, but I just want to say I totally respect both trade unionists. I'm going to give you a little bit of a tact, I guess. It's just for me, I understand you had to present a sort of, a sort of dualistic sort of way of presenting this part of the presentation. It kind of seemed like you were taking a different angle, showing us the things we don't want to look at. But I hear a lot of complexities. It just reminds me of, we spoke earlier about trade unionists and socialists having to deal with power that was structured through imperialism, and having to think about difficulties of sort of people having to give up what they have nationally for the greater good, possibly. But to me, it just seems like there's always going to be complexities, and we have got there are a lot of similarities with our fight for socialism. We don't say, oh, because we say we need to invest, we need to get people to look at the intelligentsia of our society. We need to find solutions, and we need to put resources into those solutions. So when it comes to things like fracking, yes, we need to organize everywhere where someone's working, but at the same time, don't we have a responsibility to make sure that if fracking is dangerous, that we should definitely not lobby for it. I mean, as if GMB is working in the energy sector, you have to look at the long-term interests of the energy sector as well as the short-term. So it's really just about asking you, similar to question possibly before, about what's your commitment to progressive decisions, progressive policies? Because at the end of the day, if you're not a part of the solution, then you're in effect a part of the problem.
Just right, so 2 more contributions. We really need to wrap up for past. Bill at the back.
Yeah, thanks. A lot of what I was going to say is actually what was going to say last 2 comments, but I guess my comments are directed to Comrade Gary.
I'm going to picture here.
So listening to you, I thought about tobacco. And I thought about there was a lot of tobacco workers, in fact, a lot of African American tobacco workers. And scientists discovered, despite what the industry said, that tobacco killed people. And so there was this contradiction, as Lenny was saying, between the fact that folks need jobs and the fact that millions of people will die of lung cancer. Right? So the question then is, what is the obligation of the union? Is the obligation of the union to say, well, we're not really going to talk about the fact that millions of people are dying of lung cancer. We're going to talk about renewable jobs. And I think therein lies this problem that Lenny put so eloquently. But that relates to a broader question, which I think was implicit in what he was raising, which is that much of what we're talking about here, I actually don't think can be resolved in capitalism. And that is the discussion that many people don't actually want to have. You know, whether or not capitalism can resolve the environmental crisis. I mean, when we start talking about the types of transformations that need to take place, absolutely there are reforms that we need to fight for right now. But at the end of the day, I don't see that capitalism can resolve it. And here's my final point. 2 points. One is that there's going to be plenty of jobs if we don't resolve the environmental crisis. We should all be clear about that. Because we will be building what Isaac Asimov called caves of steel. Humanity will go beneath the surface because the surface will become uninhabitable. And the people that will be in those areas, and it's very clear when we look at what is happening under neoliberalism right now with guarded and gated communities, are not the people that are sitting in this room, right? And not the people sitting in this room, and not the people that are represented by folks in this room. And that actually scares the shit out of me. And it relates to my very final point. A few years ago, my 25-year-old daughter, who was at that time younger, obviously, was talking with other women friends of hers. And they had this discussion that has given me nightmares ever since. They were trying to decide whether they're ever going to have children. Not because they expect nuclear war, but because they don't know whether humanity is going to get out of the 21st century and whether it is, therefore, makes any sense to have any kids. I think that is the question that we should be discussing in every trade union movement. In every trade union meeting. Will humanity make it out of the 21st century? And if it is, what do we have to do differently in order to ensure that that happens?
I'm going to allow Dave to ask a wee quick question. No? Okay, yeah, I really can't take any more people on, comrade. Sorry, I'm going to let Lara come back in because she didn't have the opportunity before.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just lift up what we've heard from so many people, which is that, you know, the mainstream environmental approach to the climate crisis is not working and it's not gonna work. You know, and if we're going to address the climate crisis, if we're actually going to do what we need to do to be able to keep living on this planet, then, you know, we as trade unionists are going to need to lead the struggle. And we need to be on the forefront of doing this. And I just think we really need to call on, you know, the best radical democratic traditions of the labor movement that have been used in the past, where we were fighting on behalf of the whole working class. And I think we also have an obligation to build alliances with the environmental movement. I mean, Gary mentioned that there's different segments of the environmental movement, and that's true. And there's a lot of folks in the climate justice and environmental justice movement who are also trade unionists. They're also from the working class, and they're thinking along the same lines. And just to go back to the need to build a broad-based, powerful movement to be able to realize an alternative society, right, that's based on radical democracy and a socialist society, we need to build those alliances. So I think we have an obligation to build that dense ecosystem of social movements that include the trade union movement to tackle this challenge. And, you know, from a U.S. perspective, if you talk to young people, you know, go into high schools, go into grade schools and ask them what a union is, many of them don't know. But if you ask them about the environmental movement, they know, and they're actually often already engaged in environmental movement work. So I just think that's another piece of this that we need to bring into it. So, and you know, and just to pick up on some of the things that Sean said, you know, and thinking about the best traditions of the labor movement, like in New York in the 40s, when we couldn't get the government to build public housings, unions just went ahead and built, you know, affordable housing for their members and for the working class themselves. And we could be doing the same thing with renewable energy, right? And this is a strategy that's worked in Germany. It's like, if we want to create jobs, then we directly hire through a public program workers to do energy efficiency work in low-income public housing. It creates jobs, it reduces their energy bill, and it deals with the climate crisis. So I just think, you know, we need to lead the struggle.
one announcement. A very quick announcement. In September, September 21st in New York City, there's going to be the People's Climate March. Some of you may know that there is going to be a UN climate summit called by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. The summit's a waste of time, frankly, but the summit is being called because Ban Ki-moon understands that there's a crisis and world leaders are not dealing with it, so he's putting it on the agenda of the General Assembly. So it's putting it in the face of world leaders.
So as he was, sorry, brother, you finished?
No, I'm not finished. A march is being organised.
Don't take a pause.
A march is being organised, which has got trade union backing. All the organisations are organised. It's going to be the largest march on climate change thus far in history. So if you can get your union or your organisation there, Unions for Energy Democracy are organising public events. We're organising a working meeting, and we're part of the mobilisation for this march on September the 21st in New York City. And there's going to be local initiatives in the UK as well. Speak to Graham and others afterwards about what's going on in the UK to coincide with the People's Climate
I have
March.
some flyers I'll bring tomorrow.
I need to let Gary, you know, as he's been so picked on, I'm going to let Gary have the last word just on those questions.
Very quickly, I mean, let's think about Germany. Let's just deal with this thing about Germany. Well, it's fantastic, isn't it? Shut down the nuclear power stations and they're building coal-fired power stations to keep the lights on, including lignite power stations, some of the dirtiest coal that we can possibly find. The Germans, who do an anti-nuclear, import French nuclear electricity, and indeed they import electricity from Norway and then export their coal-generated electricity at night. They have a massive renewables programme, a lot of positives from it, hugely costly, massive subsidies that go on people's bills. And by the way, German manufacturers don't have to pay any renewables costs. Those costs are passed on to the ordinary German people through the bills. So that means German manufacturing can benefit and thrive in a way that it doesn't in the UK. And the truth is, this country is comparatively a poor country compared to a very wealthy country like Germany, who's far better placed to make those investments and make those subsidies to keep the renewables going. Point about tobacco, it's a fantastic point. Thanks for that comment. We've exported smoking from this country to Southeast Asia. If you go there, everybody smokes. Big Tobacco has exported smoking to Southeast Asia in the same way it's exported our jobs and our carbon. So I'm not sure it's a particularly good analogy. In terms of where we stand, renewables, I'm sorry, I don't think the technology is there yet. There will be a breakthrough technology. I don't think we're there. Either with wind, it possibly will be solar, but we aren't. And the future in the UK, certainly for the next 40 years, I predict, will be gas and it will be nuclear. And that's the debate we have to engage around. We can talk about the realities, or we can talk about just what our hopes and dreams are. And as I say, I'm a trade union official who has to live in the real world. In terms of the imminent crisis, the crisis in the UK is this winter, tens of thousands of people are facing the prospect of dying because they can't afford to pay their bills, and we as a country will struggle to keep the lights on. What I'm saying in short, I'm trying to agree with comrades, I'm trying to build bridges with people, believe it or not, but I am providing with a challenge, because the rhetoric and slogans at the moment are not resonating with working class people, because they don't resonate with millions of working class people up and down the country who are struggling to find decent work and who are struggling to pay their bills. And they're certainly switching off large tranches of the energy workers in the UK. Our immediate challenge, by the way, in Scotland will be about unionising the North Sea, not closing the thing down. Thank you.
Right, sorry. Okay. Oh my God, it'll never end.
No, I'm not sure if Sean mentioned this, but I just think we should acknowledge that GMB is participating in Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, which is great. Sean and I met with Gary and Bert a couple months back, and yeah, and so this is an ongoing conversation.
You've been nominated. Aye, sorry. So comrades, we really need to wrap up. We're running. Comrades, we're running 30 minutes behind time, so we really need to go into the discussion groups. Are we wanting to have a break of some sort?
Yeah. I've got a proposal about that.